Localism is the political ideal of prioritizing economic and political self-determination of local communities over centralized, distant, or global entities. Examples of such localist political practices already in place are things like community land trusts, which are nonprofit organizations that own land so to remove it from the speculative market, which ensures housing remains affordable for local residents rather than being bought up by developers or foreign investors. The Champlain Housing Trust in Vermont has preserved thousands of units of affordable housing permanently for local residents. This is a perfect example of a localist political organization, even if they wouldn't necessarily present themselves as localist. The Shop Local movement is another example. This takes the form of independent business alliances that market locally owned shops. The American Independent Business Alliance helps cities create campaigns that shift subsidies away from big box stores and towards local independence. Participatory budget is a process where citizens directly decide how to allocate a portion of a municipal budget. It gives residents actual power over spending rather than just voting for representatives who decide for them. This is sometimes even done in New York City, to some extent, where residents have voted on funding for new parks, school technology, and public safety improvements. Farm-to-school programs are another example. Schools commit to buying a percentage of their cafeteria food from local farms rather than national food service distributors. Many school districts in Oregon and California now have contracts with local growers, keeping farm revenue in the state. Community-supported agriculture is where consumers buy a share of the farm's harvest at the beginning of the season. The farmer gets capital up front to buy seeds, and the consumer gets a weekly box of whatever is harvested. There are even things called transition towns in places like England. They print their own money, plant community orchards to provide a small amount of local free food, and even implemented an energy descent plan to wean the town off fossil fuels. Community solar gardens have a community build solar arrays and subscribers get credit on their electricity bills. These exist down in Minnesota and Colorado, allowing renters and low-income residents to benefit from local green energy. Community mesh networks have a community group of neighbors set up their own Wi-Fi routers, creating a local internet that functions even if the main grid goes down. Red Hook Wi-Fi in Brooklyn, New York was set up to provide communication during Hurricane Sandy when major ISPs failed. Platform cooperatives sometimes try to provide alternatives to apps like Uber or Airbnb that are instead owned and governed by the local workers and users. These are all examples of localist organizations, though few would present themselves with that title, and few were likely intended to be political organizations at all in the first place. They came into being because they needed to fill a niche job that needed doing in their communities. But that's the basis of localist ideology in the first place, that grassroots community organizations can and should rise up to undertake to outperform the centralized or federalized services. So, when they do exactly that, it can be seen in a way as a small victory for believers in the localist political ideology. If Marxism's big famous phrase, compressing the entirety of its ideology down to a sentence, was, "The workers should seize the means of production," then perhaps neolocalism can be described best in this single sentence. The citizens should recreate and outperform the government at the processes of essential services. What is neolocalism? To start off, I began with a description of localism, but as the title says, neolocalism is my real main topic. It's really not much different from the core concepts of localism, with a key addition. Mainly, neolocalism is the idea that a unified assortment of localist programs working in tandem across the country could theoretically leverage political power in unexpectedly significant and immediately impactful ways. If they had enough resources and manpower and used their power in similar ways to nonviolent uprisings throughout history, localist programs can quickly become a serious political force worth reckoning. Just like how Gandhi did in India with the Indian community rebuilding programs, which took power directly away from British colonial rule, Gandhi fixed problems the government wouldn't, and it generated more public support for the Indian independence movement while simultaneously helping the community. The methodology of using these public nonprofits and volunteer organizations as political leverage is what this term, neolocalism, is all about. If localism is a process of wrangling power away from centralized or federalized services by the creation of community-driven projects, then neolocalism is the theoretical banding together of those services to engage in a highly advanced form of nonviolent protest. Volunteer firefighters make up nearly 70% of the firefighting forces across the U.S. If they, for some reason, decided to strike, things would go south in a lot of places very quickly. If an organization like the National Cooperative Business Association and the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, which are organizations connecting and coordinating between large numbers of volunteer groups to co-op, if they were to somehow team up, they could, for instance, theoretically engage in a massive organized co-op strike for economic leverage. Traditional protests usually involve people stopping work, but if NCBA and SEN are coordinated, they could organize a protest where businesses continue to work but refuse to deal with the entities that they are protesting against. Imagine a federal policy that somehow hurted a bunch of local communities. If a coordinated network of rural electric co-ops, credit unions, and food co-ops could collectively refuse to pay fees or comply with regulations until they changed, well, it would be a very significant, interesting form of nonviolent protest, perhaps not done before, but immediately, obviously, clearly very effective. This isn't just people holding signs. This is potentially billions of dollars of economic activity applying pressure. But the real meat and potatoes of neolocalism is the idea of constructive programs. This is a form of protest where you simply ignore the failing system and build a better one in its place, rendering the old one obsolete. Gandhi used this tactic, as mentioned. If a theoretical coalition of localist organizations decided the federal healthcare system was broken, they wouldn't have to protest it. They could aggressively scale up healthcare co-ops to provide care outside the insurance system. If they thought the banking system was faulty, they could theoretically move millions of dollars into community development and credit unions. The very existence of these successful cooperatives acts as a living critique of the status quo already. In a way, it says, we don't need you to the government. The core tenet of neolocalism is to get more people saying that and louder through actions, not less words. Volunteer groups and agricultural co-ops and food supply chains could theoretically coordinate a selective purchasing campaign. If a large corporation acts against localist values, such as destroying a local environment, a theoretical localist coalition could encourage the farmers and producers part of that coalition to stop selling to that distributor. Such a localist coalition could also back legal cases asserting the right of local self-government, similar to the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund strategy, arguing that local communities have the right to reject corporate projects like pipelines or big box stores, even if the federal government approves. The next evolution of peaceful protests is neolocalism. If only there could be a merger of the institutional co-op unions, volunteer groups, and the political movement activists. If they ever fully synchronized, they wouldn't just be capable of localism. They would become a political force capable of challenging the dominance of centralized state and corporate power. Such a coalition is waiting to come into existence, ripen its coalition across the USA, requiring only some amount of external force. Like a future philanthropist who donates generally to the right groups at the right time, or an unexpected surgency of interest in volunteer group across the general people of America. Or perhaps just a sudden political interest formed in those leading the NCBA and SEN organizations. Either way, there is a shadow looming over America, and that is the shadow of neolocalism. To be all dramatic about it. A large part of the vehicle of oppression, though, genuinely, holding the common man down across the world, is the lack of access to proper, quality, consistent essential services. Taking control back from the government of these essential services is, I believe, one of the most straightforward ways of engaging in true nonviolent revolution. Citizens should surpass the government at providing essential services.